Welcome to the Past in Pictures channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. The intense gaze of a Russian child, face stained with soot, stands out as she holds a piece of moldy bread. The image symbolizes the severe famine that struck the Volga River region between 1921 and 1922. This extreme scarcity was worsened by civil conflict and prolonged droughts. This image is part of a documentary album and shows trains arriving with thousands of Hungarians at the rail area of a site at the time. In the yard, officials carried out immediate selection of the newly arrived during 1944. The place operated under strict control during one of the most intense phases of movement. Allied troops found thousands of wedding rings and valuable personal belongings on May 5, 1945, near a site in Germany. The taking of these items was part of an institutionalized system, turning interrupted lives into material resources. Survivors at the Unsee site in Austria wait for assistance from Allied troops on May 7, 1945. The location was a subcamp of Mauthausen used for forced labor in strategic tunnels. Liberation revealed harsh conditions imposed by the authorities of the time, marking the end of operations there. A human shadow remains imprinted on the stone steps of the Sumitomo Bank in a Japanese city after a morning in August 1945. Thermal effects preserved the outline of someone waiting for the bank to open at the moment of the event. This silent trace permanently marks the place's history. A wristwatch recovered among the ruins of a Japanese city is permanently stopped at 8:15 in the morning. The object was frozen by extreme conditions and intense heat in August 1945. The piece became a symbol of the immediate impact on the location as the conflict came to an end. On the streets of Naples, Italy in 1944, two boys walk arm in arm after hardship, with one of them using support to walk. In the background, pedestrians cross a square damaged by fighting. The photograph records civilian life near the end of the Second World War and how children affected by the conflict adapted. After a major event in 2001 in New York City, emergency teams used search dogs in a debris field. These animals were essential for locating missing people, symbolizing the city's collective effort to respond and help. On March 19, 1921, in the United States, President Warren G. Harding greets First World War veterans at a public ceremony. In the foreground, a former soldier with severe physical limitations moves on a makeshift wheeled board. The photo records gaps in post-war care for veterans. Between quiet streets and a hard daily life, two children hug, seeking protection in each other. The scene, recorded in the early 20th century, shows how affection and togetherness became a refuge in the face of poverty and uncertainty, even in the toughest moments. During the Second World War, the camp on the island of Rab operated under Italian administration in occupied Yugoslav territory. The site held thousands of people, revealing the harsh occupation policies imposed in that region of Europe. Sealed wooden rail cars reinforced with barbed wire transported civilians in harsh conditions during the Second World War. Faces appear through small openings searching for air, showing the logistics of large-scale removal in Europe. The rail system was central to this displacement. The siege of Leningrad during the Second World War caused one of the largest humanitarian crises in modern history, subjecting civilians to long periods of scarcity. On January 27, 1944, the city's liberation revealed the resilience of survivors who walked through damaged areas and smoke to rebuild their lives. Three young people sit in front of the ruins of a home in East London in September 1940. The destruction was caused by air raids during the Second World War, showing the conflict's impact on civilians and British urban infrastructure at the time. A child holds her doll while sitting in a damaged area in London in 1940. The scene reveals damage to residential neighborhoods caused by repeated attacks during the period. The image is part of civilian documentation of the Second World War's everyday impact in England. Dragul Jub Celacic appears in military gear among defensive positions during the First World War. Only 12 years old, the young soldier took part in the defense of Belgrade against opposing troops. His story shows the extreme mobilization of civilians and children on the Serbian front in that conflict. Abandonment and neglect of animals in conflict zones or natural disasters reveal how vulnerable living beings are during crisis. On May 14, 2012, this small puppy was found among debris in an affected area, waiting for rescue and symbolizing lost innocence. Zita Seuss represents one of the hundreds of thousands of children separated from their families during the expansion of the German regime across Europe. This systematic process of forced assimilation aimed to shape young people to the era's ideological ideal, altering identities and destinies. Several boys work bent over in a coal operation in Pennsylvania in 1911. Known as breaker boys, these children faced exhausting, risky shifts under thick clouds of coal dust. The image from South Pittston exposes harsh child labor conditions in United States industry. Workers known as the Radium Girls are shown working in a factory in 1922. They used radium-based glowing paint to color watch dials without any protective equipment. Prolonged exposure led to serious health problems for the young women. Sign plaques at a station in Oklahoma in July 1939 reinforced segregation laws in the United States. The water fountain designated for African Americans shows the social restrictions imposed by the separate spaces doctrine. Civic life followed rules of exclusion. Blanche Monnier was found in Poitiers on May 23, 1901, after spending 26 years in prolonged domestic confinement. The case shocked France by revealing that her own family kept her hidden for social reasons, exposing dark power dynamics within the aristocracy of the time. During 1940 in British hospitals, nurses carried out constant training with special protective gear designed for babies. The device fully enclosed the child and required hand pumping of filtered air to ensure safety if there was a threat in the environment. Technological integration in traditional communities in Namibia shows the growth of global connectivity in the past decade. On October 20, 2014, the image of Himba children encountering mobile devices captures cultural shock and curiosity sparked by digital expansion in remote parts of the African continent. Published in London in 1807, this specific edition of the Holy Bible was compiled for use in the British West Indies. The text went through severe edits to remove passages that mentioned freedom or equality. The goal was to reinforce submission and social control in the colonies. Animal-assisted therapy in hospital settings has become a humane practice essential to the well-being of patients in special care. On November 18, 2017, the meeting between an older patient under clinical care and his pet dog reinforced the importance of emotional support during treatment. Father Luis Manuel Padilla supported a wounded soldier during a period of unrest in Puerto Cabello, Venezuela on June 4, 1962. The photograph taken by Hector Rondon Lovera won World Press Photo and the Pulitzer Prize, symbolizing humanitarian aid amid the country's civil tensions. The Magdalene Laundries operated in Ireland as reform institutions for women who were seen as defying prevailing social norms. Run by religious orders, the residents were subjected to exhausting labor and harsh treatment, exposing a punitive system that lasted for decades in the country. A family of Japanese descent returned to their home in Seattle on May 10, 1945, after a period of relocation in Idaho. When they arrived, they found the front marked with exclusionary messages, reflecting the social hostility they faced even after the restrictions ended. In April 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was photographed removing a burned cross from the yard of his home in Atlanta. Beside his young son, the civil rights leader faced intimidation and prejudice in silence, reaffirming his commitment to peaceful resistance. Apartment buildings and homes appear heavily damaged in Irpin after intense tensions and events in early 2022 in the Kyiv region. The scene of urban damage reflects the scale of the impact on civilian infrastructure, showing the immediate hardships faced by the population. The Kosovo War created a humanitarian crisis that forced thousands of civilians to seek refuge in neighboring countries at the end of the 20th century. On March 29, 1999, young Agim Shala was passed over barbed wire fences to his grandparents at a camp in Albania, symbolizing the refugee ordeal. In Haeungju, the resilience of a young Korean girl is captured as she carries her younger brother amid the Korean War. The image from June 9, 1951, highlights the contrast between human fragility and the imposing M26 tank in the background, symbolizing the harsh reality faced by local civilians. Guatemala's civil war lasted for more than 3 decades, leaving deep scars on the country's indigenous communities. On June 15, 1982, the image of a father holding his crying child among vegetation became a quiet portrait of conflict and displacement experienced by many families. The Second World War brought hardship to civilian populations across many fronts in Europe. On September 14, 1942, amid intense air attacks, a young refugee cried while holding a small crucifix, seeking spiritual comfort in that moment. Severe flooding caused by Typhoon Ketsana hit the Philippines on September 26, 2009, forcing thousands of people to leave their homes. In Marikina, a resident risked his life to save his pet dogs, carrying them in a plastic basin across the rooftops of flooded houses. The Sichuan earthquake on May 12, 2008, stands as one of the largest natural disasters in modern China. Amid the rubble of Beichuan, recovering family photo albums became an act of preserving personal memory in the face of material devastation and irreversible loss. The Union Carbide plant in Bhopal appears in an exterior view tied to the scene of a major industrial disaster. On the night of December 2, 1984, the release of methyl isocyanate exposed hundreds of thousands of people to hazardous substances, causing serious public health effects in the region. A photograph taken by Igor Kostin shows the wreckage of Unit 4 shortly after the event of April 26, 1986. The heavy grain in the developed image happened because of extreme conditions in the air. The photographer flew over the area in a helicopter to document the scale of the structural damage. A Rapitronic camera developed by Harold Edgerton captured the opening millisecond of a high-energy event around 1950. With an impressive shutter speed, the technology made it possible to see the initial pulse before the heat wave fully expanded during the Cold War. The atmospheric formation recorded over a Japanese city in August 1945 marked one of the most impactful chapters of the Second World War. The event happened just days after another decisive episode that month, changing the course of the conflict in the Pacific. The technology of the time permanently changed diplomatic relations between nations. The device known as the Gadget hangs from a test tower in the New Mexico desert in July 1945. Members of the Manhattan Project finalized technical adjustments to the era's technology before the Trinity test. The success of that operation marked the definitive start of a new era in the world. The Black Saturday bushfires devastated the state of Victoria, Australia in early 2009. On February 7, 2009, volunteer firefighter David Tree offered water to an injured koala named Sam, creating an emblematic record of human compassion during extreme climate-driven disaster. Amid the wreckage across Sarajevo, a child turns an old metal cannon into an improvised toy. The Union Invest building in the background shows the marks of the siege that isolated the city. This daily resilience reveals how life searched for normalcy among concrete ruins. Korean families carrying basic belongings seek refuge aboard the ship USS Weiss during the conflict on the Asian Peninsula. On September 16, 1952, the United States vessel served as an evacuation point for civilians fleeing fighting. The scene on the deck illustrates war-driven humanitarian displacement. German soldiers watched the destruction of a village in Bosnia during Second World War operations in the Balkan Peninsula. Thick smoke in the background indicates scorched earth tactics used against local communities. The image documents troop movement and the impact on civilians in the region. Among damaged areas and struck buildings, a woman walks alone through the streets of Dresden, Germany in 1945 after intense air raids near the end of the Second World War. Remains of buildings fill former residential and business districts. The image documents the city's condition and the conflict's impact on civilians. During the final year of the First World War, nurses were stationed in dugout shelters between the wings of a field hospital in France. These defensive structures aimed to protect the medical staff during air attacks, ensuring continued care for the wounded. Troops from Australia and New Zealand faced extreme conditions during the Gallipoli campaign in the First World War. In Turkey's rough terrain, solidarity among soldiers was vital. Carrying a comrade to the aid post at Anzac Cove showed resilience in 1915. An aerial view over the Somme Plains shows the advance of dense white clouds during a French offensive in 1917. This tactic sought to break the stalemate of European trenches. The image documents the operation's industrial and technical scale at the front. The light cruiser USS Santa Fe pulls alongside the aircraft carrier USS Franklin to rescue survivors in the Pacific Ocean. The carrier had been severely damaged after an aircraft impact, causing major fires on board. The assistance maneuver was crucial in containing the crisis at sea. During the Korean War in 1951, an Indian Army ambulance driver was supported after being injured by a heavy impact in a conflict zone. His expression of endurance reflects the harsh conditions faced by international medical support teams during that period. During the Korean War in 1951, the involvement of Chinese troops intensified the ideological conflict on the peninsula. Captured soldiers faced an uncertain fate amid harsh winter conditions and political tensions. Surrender represented human fragility in the shadow of world powers. Second World War trenches forced soldiers into long periods of waiting and tension under constant watch. On September 14, 1942, during the Battle of Stalingrad, German troops stayed sheltered in deep ditches, showing human exhaustion and the harshness of life on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought between 1942 and 1943, turned city centers into damaged areas after repeated air attacks by the German Air Force. On August 23, 1942, the image of a damaged aircraft lodged into a residential building became a symbol of the war's urban impact. The Blitz was an intense air raid campaign carried out by the German government against the United Kingdom during the Second World War. On December 29, 1940, London faced one of the most severe attacks, causing widespread damage to homes and historic landmarks. Allied troops carry heavy gear on a busy railway platform in 1940. Nearby, groups of civilians and small children take part in Operation Pied Piper, moved out of the capital to safer rural areas. British daily life was changing under constant pressure from the conflict. A family of 7 lives in an improvised tent near Exeter, California, after fleeing severe drought in Texas. In November 1936, these environmental refugees sought a living in the American West during the Dust Bowl crisis. The image exposes harsh housing conditions and daily deprivation. A family walks along an Oklahoma highway carrying their few belongings in a wheelbarrow in 1936. After losing their farm in Eagleton because pneumonia kept the father from working, the group looks for new opportunities in Krebs. The image illustrates the economic hardship of the Great Depression. A man holds a protest sign amid the social impacts of the Great Depression around 1932. The text shows a desperate request for housing for his wife and the child who will be born, using bitter irony to highlight hardship and the lack of government help affecting thousands of families in that economic moment. Workers packed into a coal mine lift in Belgium returned to the surface after a long shift, around 1900. The image documents extreme confinement and the crude setup miners faced during the Second Industrial Revolution, revealing the exploitation of labor needed to power the energy system of that era. Rapid 19th-century industrialization in England forced working-class children into extreme survival conditions in port areas. On May 14, 1870, this young barrel carrier embodied child labor exploitation and social neglect during the Victorian era. George McLaurin entered the University of Oklahoma on October 13, 1948, after a historic court battle. He was kept in separate areas in classrooms and libraries to comply with state segregation laws, revealing the structural barriers in higher education. Manager James Brock pours a chemical into the water at the Monson Motor Lodge in Florida to drive away integration protesters during the Civil Rights Movement. The event on June 18, 1964, drew worldwide attention and increased pressure for laws against segregation. Dorothy Counts walks with poise on September 4, 1957, to attend Harding High School in North Carolina. As she moves forward, she faces insults from a crowd opposing school desegregation in the United States. Her courage in the face of hostility became a landmark in the American civil rights struggle. The man identified as Pedro posed for this image on April 2, 1863, in Louisiana during the civil conflict in the United States. After leaving a rural property and traveling miles to a Union camp, he was evaluated by a military medical team that documented signs of coercion he had faced earlier. Advances in prosthetic technology allow children with congenital or acquired amputations to keep up with their own physical growth with dignity. On September 12, 2003, the display of older prosthetics alongside a young user highlighted the orthopedic progress needed to ensure mobility. The construction of the Berlin Wall on August 13, 1961, abruptly split thousands of German families. In this setting of separation, a child's despair when cut off from loved ones behind barbed wire barriers became a symbol of the Cold War and political repression. A woman on the western side of the Berlin Wall raises her arms, trying to connect with loved ones on the other side of the border. The concrete and barbed wire barrier symbolized Cold War ideological division in Germany. Hours of patient waiting reflect the drama of families separated by the Iron Curtain. On August 15, 1961, soldier Conrad Schumann carries out an act of defection by jumping the barbed wire dividing Berlin's sectors. As he watches his surroundings carefully, he becomes a symbol of crossing Cold War ideological borders in a move that challenged state surveillance and the looming construction of the wall. A group of German officers walks near the Eiffel Tower on June 23, 1940. Their presence in Paris comes soon after the fall of the French capital, symbolizing the start of a new regime of control in the territory. The city scene reflects drastic political change. A woman cries as she performs the official salute during the occupation of the city of Eger in the Sudeten region in October 1938. A sign in the background points to a clothing shop typical of the time. The scene marks the annexation of this territory by Germany, changing borders in Central Europe. During the crisis that broke apart the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, armed groups left highly symbolic messages in occupied areas. In Croatia, walls became a canvas for reflections on fate and the harshness of that period, revealing the psychological impact of the situation. Chemist Bruno Tesch sits on the left during his trial in Hamburg in 1946. As a co-inventor of a chemical pesticide, he was prosecuted for supplying the product to the German regime with knowledge of how it would be used. The case resulted in a conviction for complicity in wartime abuses. The wreckage of a Porsche 550 Spyder sits on a road in Chalem, California, marking the site of the crash that took the life of actor James Dean. On September 30, 1955, the collision ended the rise of a growing cultural icon. The image captures responders working beside the twisted vehicle structure. Aircraft wreckage lies scattered across a snow-covered field in Iowa after the crash on February 3, 1959. The event led to the loss of rock icons like Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and was memorialized in popular culture. The incident cut short promising careers at the height of the genre. Metal structures at Gore and Maine appear twisted and collapsed after Hurricane Michael's devastating passage through Florida. On October 10, 2018, the Category 5 storm caused massive damage to commercial infrastructure in the area. The image documents the impact of wind force on the local industrial sector. An atmosphere of grief surrounds the group gathered on October 22, 2011, reflecting modern mourning practices in urban cemeteries. Silence is broken only by shared comfort among those present, while dark formal clothing keeps social protocol. The farewell symbolizes the end of an era. A brief farewell happens on August 18, 2014, when a man under supervision seeks one last moment of contact before his transfer. Under an officer's watchful presence, the gesture of affection contrasts with the austere setting and strict rules, showing bonds that endure beyond the walls. Amid the turmoil of a damaged area on February 12, 1944, young fighters faced the direct shock of the front line. The overlaid text emphasizes the psychological impact felt by an entire generation during trench fighting. Emotional strain defines this record of human endurance. Sergeant Adam Lee Cann of the United States Marine Corps did not return from service on January 5, 2006 during Operation Iraqi Freedom. The tribute from his service dog resting on the headstone at Arlington National Cemetery symbolizes loyalty and the bond formed during missions in the Middle East. Religious fervor and psychological strain on Second World War battlefields appeared in intense acts of faith under enemy fire. On June 22, 1941, the start of the invasion of the Soviet Union pushed soldiers to seek spiritual support in small crucifixes as troops advanced. The rephotography technique creates a visual bridge between eras by overlaying memories onto the present scene. On July 14, 2012, this image captured an older man's nostalgia as he aligned an old photo of his late wife with the original garden bench, preserving emotional continuity. Two men appear in identification portraits in Stockholm, Sweden in 1897. They were detained by local authorities accused of having a romantic relationship, behavior considered illegal under Swedish law at the time, which imposed severe social and legal restrictions. People from the Igorot community from the Philippines are presented to the public at Dreamland Park in Coney Island around 1905. Visitors watch the traditional customs of this ethnic group with curiosity, brought to the United States for cultural displays shaped by the ideologies of that era. After the historic 1961 mission, Ham is taken out of the capsule after completing a spaceflight of about 16 hours. The chimpanzee proved that living beings could perform tasks in space and return safely, paving the way for the first crewed flights of the space race. The artwork above and beyond uses thousands of suspended metal identification tags to represent each member of the United States Armed Forces who did not return from the Vietnam conflict. Originally installed in 2001, the piece invites deep reflection on the human impact of that conflict in downtown Chicago. Otto Frank stands quietly in the attic on Prinsengracht Street in Amsterdam during the year 1960. Connected to the building's history, he looks at the old annex that was preserved for a time. His visit happened shortly before the museum opened to the public. A group of staff and workers at the site smiles during a leisure moment in 1944. The photograph is part of an album showing the social life of officials away from their usual duties. The contrast between the relaxed scene and the reality of the setting remains an important subject for historical analysis. The final Allied offensive in Europe during the Second World War led to the capture of many German cities in the first half of 1945. On April 12, 1945, American troops advanced under heavy pressure in central squares, cementing the collapse of the German regime. The Indochina War reached decisive moments between 1953 and 1954, deeply affecting Southeast Asia's social structure. On May 7, 1954, the victory at Dien Bien Phu marked the end of French colonial rule and the start of a new political era. The Battle of Iwo Jima, fought between February and March 1945, was one of the most intense clashes of the Pacific War. On February 23, 1945, raising the American flag on top of Mount Suribachi created an enduring image of collective effort and military victory. Red Square in Moscow was the setting for one of the most crucial military demonstrations in Soviet history during the Second World War. On November 7, 1941, troops marched straight from the parade to the battlefront, reaffirming Russian resistance against advancing German divisions. The Second World War created extreme living conditions, but it did not erase empathy among fighters at the front. On October 20, 1943, a soldier used his steel helmet as an improvised shelter for small kittens, revealing a rare moment of tenderness and care for life. Enthusiastic soldiers celebrate returning home on September 15, 1945, helping a young woman reach the hatch for a reunion kiss. The mood of euphoria marks the end of global hostilities and the drawdown of military fleets. This shared excitement captures the relief that filled ports after years of intense conflict. The fundamental right to education appears under difficult conditions beneath the overpass at Yamuna Bank Metro Station in New Delhi. On May 11, 2012, volunteer teacher Rajesh Kumar Sharma strengthened his free school for underprivileged children using concrete walls as improvised chalkboards to fight illiteracy. The Lyakov family lives in Russia's Ryazan region and became a notable example of perseverance in the early 21st century. After 7 daughters in a row, the search for a first male heir was realized only on May 12, 2005, when their 8th child was born. The removal of the Amona outpost in the West Bank led to intense clashes between Israeli settlers and security forces on February 1, 2006. A woman's solitary resistance against a line of riot police became an iconic image of the region's territorial and ideological disputes. The LGBT Pride Parade in Toronto, Canada is recognized worldwide for promoting diversity and for peaceful interaction between authorities and the public. On July 1, 2012, a local police officer joined a water gun game, showing a moment of lightness and closeness. The marriage of Wu Konghan and Wu Songshi in Sichuan province reflects the resilience of rural customs in China. On November 11, 2012, the couple celebrated 88 years of marriage with a formal photo shoot, fulfilling a long-held wish to wear Western wedding attire.